Well, I couldn't wait to hear what happens in chapter 26, and I bet you're feeling the same way too. I was gonna go inside after I finished reading chapter 25, but I decided to stay outside and record chapter 26 so that I could read it as well. Her body was lying in the coffin. She knew she should have expected it, but there was no way to prepare for it. She closed her eyes and shrunk away from the sight of it, bending at her waist and grabbing onto a tree to keep from falling over or collapsing to her knees. She covered her face and eyes with her other hand, but struggled to pull in steady breaths of air. But with what lungs? What air? It felt as if her whole world was collapsing in on her. How could this be? How could she be in the grave? She didn't want to look at the body, but she knew she must. She slowly turned and looked again, her nose and mouth wrinkling as she expected to see her body's rotten skin peeling back from her bones. But her body wasn't rotten. Her body was facing upward, with her eyes closed, her hands neatly lying one over the other on her chest, like someone had laid her there with respect and care. As she looked closer, she could see that some dirt had spilled into the grave onto her, but her body and face were not rotted. She was not a grotesque corpse. She appeared to be in some form of suspended animation, as if she lay in eternal spring. Brayden had brought her to the Angel's Glade, where decay and seasons and the cycles of the universe had no sway, no effect on the earth around them, no pull, no impact. And so where she has been, the author said it was like she was in suspended animation, so just kind of left as she was, not rotting. She's also not getting better, she just kind of is there. Serafina stood over her own grave and stared down into the coffin and her body in disbelief. Brayden and Gideon stood beside her. Her body was clearly dead in that there was no life in her, no breathing or movement, and yet her body was not blue or grayish as skin or decayed in any way. It seemed perfectly protected there, as if nothing would ever harm it. Serafina studied Brayden's expression. He did not seem surprised that her body was in the coffin. He seemed to expect it. He had put it there. But his eyes were wide and his face filled with shock about something else. "All the wounds are healed," Brayden said in amazement. Her dress was badly torn and stained with old blood, but her body was in perfect condition. A couple chapters ago, I read about the vision Rowena gave to Serafina so she could see the night that she died. And it said she was very badly injured because of the spells Rowena was casting on her. So her chest and her abdomen were very badly injured, and now the blood remains on her dress. It's torn, but her body is okay. He turned and looked up at the angel. "You healed her," he said, almost apologetically after the accusations he'd slung at her earlier that night. "You've been protecting her," he said, as he wiped tears of relief from his eyes. Serafina gazed all around at the Angel's Glade with its beautiful, peaceful willow trees and its lovely green grass. It had always been this way, winter, spring, summer, and fall. Brayden looked up at the angel again and spoke to her as if she was not only a living, sentient being, but a true friend. "But what do I know? How do I help her?" He looked at the angel expectantly, but after a long time, his excitement faded, and some of his old sadness returned. "Don't give up hope," Serafina whispered. Finally, he laid himself down on the dirt next to her open grave like he himself was dead. "I'm not gonna lose hope, Serafina," he said. "Somehow, I'm gonna get you out of here." She knew he hadn't truly heard her. They had been feeling the same thing at the same time. Serafina gazed down at Brayden lying beside the grave, and she tried to understand it all. Her human body lay in the coffin. Her panther body was out in the forest, a wild animal. Her restless spirit had crawled out of the grave, carrying with it all the trappings and constraints she remembered of the physical world. The steadiness of the earth, the challenges of the physical obstructions, the essence of sight and sound and feeling, pain and hunger and sleep. But it had left her body behind, like a cicada crawling out of its dried shell. Her spirit had made it all the way back to Biltmore and haunted those within, and now she was back again. Her spirit was here once more. For a long time, she just tried to understand, the difference between thought and action, between dream and waking, between the physical world and the spiritual, between perception and reality. She tried to figure out what Brayden meant when he said he was going to get her out of here. Out of the grave? Out of her dead body? She didn't understand, but at least she knew now, without any doubt, that even after all this time, after all this had happened, he was still her friend. He was still fighting for her, and he still had hope. He had tremendous hope, brighter than the darkest night. He was lying on his back now beside the grave, and his eyes were open. Gideon crept forward and curled up close beside him, and Brayden put his arm around him. For months, Brayden had been pushing his dog away, ashamed of the boy he had become. But now the rift between them seemed as if it was beginning to heal. Serafina was glad to see them together, but why was this happening here and now? What had changed? As Brayden stared up through the opening in the trees, she wondered what he was looking at, what he was thinking about in that moment. She went over to him. She did not go near her dead body lying in the grave. She was scared of what might happen if she did that, but she went to his other side. As she moved, she noticed a pair of yellow eyes staring from the shadows. The cat's black fur was nearly invisible in the darkness, but Serafina could see the panther's face and the outline of her ears. The panther had crept up close and was lying down now, still and quiet, gazing into the glade toward them. Serafina slowly made her way over to Brayden and lay down in the dirt next to him. Lying on her back beside him, she gazed up through the opening of the angel's glade into the nighttime sky. She and Brayden were looking up into the stars just like they had when they used to lie on Biltmore's rooftop together. Those nights seemed so long ago now, like they had been a dream, but it had all been real, and somehow this was too. Lying side by side, they gazed up at the crystalline black ceiling of the midnight sky. It was a beautifully clear night. They could see thousands of points of light splayed above them, clusters of many stars, Saturn and Mars and Jupiter, glowing in all their glory, and the brightness of the Milky Way galaxy splashed across the glistening heavens. Again, Robert Beatty is using such good descriptive language, and when you sit down to write something, or you're even thinking about something that you want to write in your head, details like that, where he's describing how dark the sky is, but how clearly they can see the stars and the planets, that's beautiful. And it helps us really see it in our heads. It's really cool. They watched the stars and the planets sliding slowly over their heads, marking time so precisely that it was barely perceptible, like a great steady clock, keeping the time of their inner lives, showing them that out there in the world, everything was always changing, but here in the center of the world, where they were lying side by side, everything would always remain the same. For the first time, Brayden did not seem upset by her spirit's presence. With her spirit on one side, her human body on the other, and the panther nearby, all was well again. It had been the terrible separation of the three that had caused him such tearing grief, but now he lay quietly. As Brayden fell asleep beside her and she fell asleep beside him, she began to slip away, not into a nightmare like before, but into a lovely dream. She dreamed she was a tendril of moving air, flowing from place to place without weight or body. Only movement, constant movement, from forest to home, from mountain to field. She swept and rolled and turned like the music of a gentle symphony gliding on the breeze. For once in a long time, she and Brayden were together, and they were finally at peace. We'll pick up with chapter 27 in the next video. Love you. Miss you.